Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Dr. Schwartz and Mr. Power. I'm your host, the guy with the made-up sounding last name, Alex Power. With me, as usual, is my co-host, your father's, brother's, nephew's, cousin's roommate, Dr. Alex Schwartz. How you doing, Alex?
I'm doing well, recovering from a Blue Jays loss, but otherwise pretty good.
Okay, yeah, no, that hit a lot of people pretty hard.
If baseball's
did you
your
hear
jam,
that they're making a new? Yes, no, that's it is for some. Did you hear that they're making a new Spaceballs movie?
I did, and I'm very excited about the excessive usage of my last name again. That joke never died during school,
Excellent.
and I'm looking forward to it coming back.
Awesome. Well, I read it on the internet, so it must be true. Okay, so today we're going to talk about exercise selection. Specifically, how often should you be changing your exercises in your program? Why you should and shouldn't do it. This is something that I've changed my own thinking on over the years. And there's a lot of space to sort of reason through this, both from a experience perspective as a coach, and as well as from an evidence-based perspective, as things have changed over the years. So let's get started. So I don't want to turn this into a history podcast, but I feel like every time we start, we do have to back up a little bit to give a bit of context. So, for those who don't know, it used to be that if you go back to in books, which are old information technology used to communicate from one person to another.
On paper, typically.
You would see in the, on paper. We're talking post-Parchment.
Post-Gutenberg or?
So, because I think we're talking post-Gutenberg, for me anyway.
This is a history podcast.
I found an interesting book that we could go back, which I'll bring something up next time. All right. Okay. So if you go back to the 70s and 80s, variety in exercises, doing a lot of different things was just taken for granted, right? Like if you look at things like Muscle and Fitness magazines, or Muscle and Fitness, which is a big magazine at the time, or maybe the single most popular book was Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding. There's hundreds of exercises, and it was just taken for granted that that's how everybody trained. They argued about other stuff, like whether or not you should do one set to failure or multiple sets, but nobody was arguing about, the variety in your training. And at the same time in the 70s and weightlifting, like Olympic weightlifting, you had really the biggest influence was the USSR. And they were big proponents of a wide range of exercises, doing lifts from, different positions, from, blocks, from a hang. Just, if you could think of it, they were doing some version of it. And the only really dissenting voice in this was, again, coming from weightlifting. And I only bring this up because you still see its influence today. And that was from the Bulgarian weightlifting team under Ivan Abajev, starting in the 70s and up through the 80s. And, this is a guy who basically developed this notion of doing heavy singles all the time, only really doing the clean and jerk and the snatch and squatting. And that was overwhelmingly what they did.
Mm-hmm. And that's with some pharmaceutical intervention, from my understanding in the previous podcast.
Yes, no, there was some pharmaceutical intervention to support this, frankly, completely bananas approach to training. People training 4 times a day, 6 times a day, just maxing out all the time. It was just bananas.
Just getting yoked.
Yep. Nobody looks at it naively anymore. Nobody sort of thinks of that training and thinks, yeah, I could do that. But the ideas are still kicking around and you can still see their influence. I don't know if you saw a while ago in sort of powerlifting circles, there was a big sort of kerfuffle over the notion of, could you squat every day? And people argue back and forth about it. And it's like, well, yeah, you can. Weightlifters have been doing it for decades. But I think in the more sort of gen pop, it had a novelty to it. And I don't want to be that guy who's like, oh, weightlifters did it first. But in this case, weightlifters did it first.
They did. They did it first, yeah. And faster.
I think then come like the mid 2000s, I guess, there started to be, kicking around the internet, this idea of just stick to the basics, right? Like all you got to do is like bench, squat, deadlift, and
Drink tons of milk, I think, was one of the programs.
yeah, the 20
Yeah.
squat program, or I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, what
That's
was
an
it?
old book too, actually.
Yeah, it was. I remember I had roommates doing it, and I thought they were lunatics.
That's just gross.
Yeah, you think that's gross? You should have seen the bathrooms. Ugh.
Lots of milk. So yeah, for the uninitiated, you were supposed to do 20 reps of squats. I don't remember if it was every day or what, and then drink some crazy amount of milk to support it.
The equivalent amount of milk in liters? I'm not sure.
I don't know. I think you get 4 point some liters in a gallon, maybe. I don't know. This is in like 18th century England, so I don't care what gallons are.
How many stones is it, though?
Yeah, exactly. People always talk about freedom units, and it's, again, let's take a little history lesson. If you're someone who uses things like gallons, those are loyalist units. They're the opposite of freedom units. All right. So for me, I think probably the first time I thought about this or sort of turned my mind to it would be like late 90s, early 2000s. And that was, the explanation, of course, was, you have to keep changing the exercise to shock the muscle or confuse the muscle, which, physiologically is nonsense. It doesn't mean anything. But I'm sort of curious what you're thinking. I suspect it was similar. What was your thinking at the time? Or what do you remember about, around that time, which is actually around when we met?
Well, I mean, it started prior to that for me. It was with the aforementioned magazines with Muscle and Fitness and the Bible of the Arnold Schwarzenegger Encyclopedia. As an aspiring young teenager growing up who wanted to lift weights, and I think for me it wasn't so much about variety as it was about variety coming from program changes, and so I kind of understood the concept of, if you're going to do a squat, do a front squat or a back squat, kind of the basics. But in terms of exercise variety, yeah, the thing with doing sort of a bodybuilding style workout like Arnold Schwarzenegger's workouts was that you were just doing all of the exercises. So the variety was just, you were always doing them all the time, which again, isn't very easy to do when you're not on drugs. So that kind of wore out quickly. And then as I got into sport, it was very much changing programs based on phases in the sport with this idea of periodization. But again, it evolved over time, I guess, similarly to yours, because then when we met, you remember some of the training that I was doing or was asked to do from the team that I was on, and then it was sort of, not ideal for the kind of training that was required to do it. So there was a lack of power and strength, and there was an emphasis on biceps on some days for some odd reason. And so, in terms of variety and changing exercises, for me, it just kind of came after a while. It came after, let's say, a few weeks. I knew that as I got more experience with lifting, I noticed that every 3-4 weeks, I felt that I wasn't really seeing as many results from the exercise. And I know you're going to speak about that a little bit more today, about whether, there's this process of learning and exercise over time. But again, with experience, it's a little bit different, I suppose. And so I would change exercises then. And it doesn't have to be a drastic change from the way I always approach it. It was just maybe changing an angle slightly or something like that. But I know that variety definitely keeps it interesting and spicy. So I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on those.
Yeah. And I think you touch on something that I think is worth mentioning too, because it speaks to, I think, initially how arbitrary some of the decisions around variety or when the program change happens are. Like you said, 3 to 4 weeks. And I mean, the 4 weeks is by far and away what you see the most. And I think that's just because it's a month, right? Not because there's anything special about 4 weeks, not because experience shows 4 weeks is ideal, or because there's some research saying, yeah, 4 weeks, you should change your exercises. If anything, now that we have more research on this, because of course, research into strength training in the late 90s, early 2000s was rudimentary at best, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're starting from the same place, right? Where we're in the late 90s, early 2000s. Everybody thinks you should be changing your workouts every few weeks, except for weightlifters. Even then, you do see, pretty regular changes in exercises or programs. And so there's very good reasons to change, exercises. So why don't we maybe go through some of them? And then, the listener can have some tools to evaluate why they might want to change exercises or programs and why they might want not to, which I actually see as sort of the thing that people get wrong more often. I think it's easier or it's more obvious to people that they should change their program. If things aren't going the way you want, you're not making progress, change your program, right? Or change an exercise. And I'm not convinced at this point that's necessarily what you should do, especially if, actually not especially anything. It's often not the answer, but it sometimes is. All right, so why don't we start into some of these reasons? So the first one I think to address is for technical reasons, right? And this applies, more to things like weightlifting or sporting movements, but also to powerlifting to a degree, although a lot less because there's such a low skill component. And I'm not dunking on powerlifting. It just isn't that complicated, the lifts, when you compare it to something like most sporting movements or even weightlifting. And so, there's a decent amount of evidence showing that if you vary the way you do a movement, it seems to improve learning long term. The explanations for it aren't great. If you look into motor learning theory research, it's kind of all over the place. There's a lot of models, but they don't have a ton of support. And, when they do these meta-analyses, there's often a lot of bias in the results and, a lot of material supporting certain theories coming out of the same labs. So I think, again, I'm not dunking on motor learning theory, but it's going to be a while before the explanations are there.
Do you think the
So
Soviets, that was part of the reason why they had sort of a everything in the kitchen sink approach to weightlifting?
yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think that is part of it. Like one of the very early theorists in learning theory or motor learning theory was a Russian. I can't remember his name. I'll find it and I'll put it in the show notes. But he did an analysis with what do you call them? Like smiths or you guys with the hammer and they make stuff out of metal.
Blacksmiths?
What's that called? Blacksmiths. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he analyzed the, blacksmithery just doesn't come up as much as it used to. So I couldn't find the word.
I'll be honest with you. It was like 2 days ago. There was a blacksmith on TV or something that we're talking. Yesterday, it was some educational programming for my kid, and they were talking about blacksmiths and old timey things. It's the only reason it's on my mind right now. So good timing. If it was any other day,
yeah, I know. So yeah, this researcher, he videoed a bunch of blacksmiths hammering a thing. I don't know. Let's just say it was a horseshoe. I had no idea.
metal.
And then he analyzed the something metal.
Yeah,
he analyzed the arc of the swing. And what he found was that, each swing, there was some variance in it. None of the swings were really exactly the same. And so a lot of modern theory, maybe too much, honestly, is based on this idea. And you still
was
see
it just
cited
that observation
in
it was based off
theory.
of?
I mean, again, I don't want to do a disservice to motor learning theorists. It's, work has been done since, but that does still get cited. And so it's not a big stretch, I don't think, to think that, or to suggest that, the Soviets were so big on this because it was a Russian who first identified, this pattern or made this observation. But I don't know. I'm guessing.
It sounds very, very like
Um,
something that'll go on a poster too.
well, Guy with the Hammer would definitely go on a Soviet
I
poster.
mean,
So
that you could find
the
about
imagery
50 of
matches.
those. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I think, one of the nice things or what I do think is going on with a lot of these, like the variety, or one of the ways I do like to use variety when teaching someone things, is not variety for variety's sake, but rather variety is a way to simplify a movement. So if you take a complicated movement and you do just part of it, just to simplify it, it gives the lifter or the learner, something easier to manage. And you could think of the same thing in sports. If you want someone to learn a play or, complex skill, you don't teach them the whole skill. You break it down into manageable pieces. And so with lifting, sometimes if you're doing something, like weightlifting, let's say you're learning how to do a snatch, which, lots of people do now with, the popularity of
Hmm.
CrossFit and just weightlifting generally. You don't just start someone off with a bar and say, okay, do a snatch. It looks like this. Here's a video. You often start with a simpler movement. And then we revisit these things over and over as people, refine their technique over time.
Now, I have sort
I
of
mean, that's
a
something.
question to that. Um, in terms of let's say you're training athletes as opposed to somebody who wants to strictly be a weightlifter, but you want an athlete to benefit from it. And I'm thinking specifically of athletes, let's say like basketball players who could benefit from any kind of explosive movement, but they're also like 20 feet tall and don't necessarily have the same amount of time for commitment to weightlifting, and you want to keep them engaged in that and benefit from it to do things from blocks or do power movements as opposed to doing full cleans or snatches. Would that be somewhere where you could where variety could have a role?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I mean, you're actually not a terrible example. You're 6'2", which in weightlifting terms is very tall, right? Um,
Hmm.
and when you look at a barbell, the fact that the plates are typically 45 centimeters tall, that's, I don't know who picked that height, but it's just, there's nothing special about it, right? So if say you're a basketball player, or even, a lot of football players, a lot of athletes are quite tall,
Hmm.
they're big. And if there's no reason they need to pull that from the floor, so if you have athletes like that doing lifts from, like you said, from blocks or from a hang, or just starting from a different height, one that
I
makes more
personally love
sense for
working
someone
from
who's six
blocks.
foot two.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's great, right?
Hmm.
It's really useful. And honestly, the amount of, time and effort that goes into teaching, a good clean or a good snatch might not be warranted for an athlete, or,
Hmm.
just someone who wants to play at doing some weightlifting exercises, but really their main goal is fitness. Um, and I don't think, I think most people can learn the lifts all right.
Yeah.
I've got athletes in our club that are in their 60s who came in with no experience and have managed to learn how to do pretty decent clean and jerks and snatches. Do they learn them the same way they would have learned them had they come in at 13? No, but that's fine. But yeah, I think variety and, having a big repertoire for that content situation is really helpful for sure. Um, and to that,
Because
I think,
ultimately
and we'll
they're
get to,
benefiting from that triple extension, right? And that's sort of what you want, whether it's from the
well, yeah,
ground
they're just,
completely or yeah.
yeah, for sure. I mean, they're lifting a heavy thing fast. It
Hmm.
doesn't, have to abide by the rules of weightlifting.
Yeah.
I think pulls are excellent for that actually, because the technical demands of a pull are very low.
Hmm.
Like it's anyone can learn a pull, a pretty decent pull pretty quickly, and you get a lot of what you would get out of it. There's some actually researchers doing work on that. I think it's Paul Comfort's lab, but I'll double check. And they're looking at, the force output and the dynamics of the pulls versus, the classic Olympic lifts in athletes. And I think it's to answer that exact question. Like if we take basketball players, and we have them
Yeah.
doing pulls from blocks, do we get most of the same thing? And so far, their research is showing, yeah, I mean, the benefit's still there. It doesn't matter if they have a great turnover, they can rack the weight super well. And especially if someone's starting this a bit later, like as an adult, why spend the time? I mean, it's different if you have a 14-year-old and you're a competent, at teaching the Olympic lifts. Yeah, take the time, teach them. You've got potentially years, and it's fun,
It's
right?
super fun. Yeah.
If you've got someone in their 20s or more and they just want to get a little more power in their hips, they don't have to, they don't have to do that. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of time. So unless they really want to, there's other options. You can just do pulls. You can do squat jumps. You can do jump shrugs. There's lots of options. All right. So I think another one, another good thing about variety, another reason to apply it, is to focus on identified weakness, right? I think this is one of the more obvious ones for people. You said earlier when you first started lifting, and I remember doing this as a teenager because only teenagers have that combination of energy and lack of know-how, but just trying to do everything, right? Yep. I'm going to do all the exercises, and I can because I have no responsibilities because I'm 15. Yeah, I use so many biceps.
Preacher curls, concentration curls, hammer curls, reverse curls, all the curls, all the time.
All the curls. And I honestly, there was a time I would have, I don't know, I guess dissuaded people away from that more. I think it's actually mostly harmless, but also a lot of it's a waste of time. I think teenagers in particular and people in general can train a lot harder than they realize. Mm-hmm. But do you want to? Or I mean, do you have the time?
Yeah.
And if you did, do you want to spend all your time lifting weights? Even I don't, I want to do other things like record podcasts and eat dinner.
Those are two things I enjoy as well.
Yeah. So let's say, I don't know. Yeah, no, they get me through my day. Or at least the dinner does. I'm not sure about the podcast yet. We'll see how this goes. It's going to be fans we have.
There's the confidence.
But yeah, focusing on, it's the hard sell. So yeah, addressing weaknesses. Yeah. So that's one of the most obvious things, right? Like, let's say you've identified, I don't know, your upper back musculature. So the extrinsic muscles of the back. So the rhomboids, the traps, the lats. For whatever reason, you've decided that these need work. Maybe it's aesthetic. You're a bodybuilder or you just want to look good with your shirt off. Or maybe it's a sporting thing. Like that's something that, you've identified. I would be better at my event if this was stronger. So you spend some extra time on that, right? So you switch up your program because we're assuming you can't do everything all at once. So you're going to have to displace some things and spend more time on exercises for the upper back. I think to add a point to that, that's talking about a program change, but an exercise change is a little, or can be a little bit different, right? So, you've decided you want to focus on, in this example, your upper back. So your pulling muscles. How often do you change that? Like the exercise selection within that program. So you've got your new program. Do you run, say you're doing, seated rows, you're doing 4 sets of that. You're doing 4 sets of pull downs or maybe pull ups if you're stronger. And then you're doing, 3 sets of dumbbell rows for each arm. How long do you let that run? So, if you'd have asked me 20 years ago, when we started this story, I would have said, every 4 weeks, let's switch up some characteristic of that. Let's switch up either the reps, or maybe we'll change the exercise, or, we'll change the angle. Like you said, like we'll do it a little bit differently. And now I'm actually a lot less inclined to do that. And that's, again, goes back to this learning piece, which is we'll cover in a minute, or in a few minutes. So, before I probably would have changed to like every 4 weeks. I would have said, okay, here's your program, goes for 4 weeks. And then we're going to change it. We're going to increase the weight and drop the reps, or we're going to change the exercise, or some characteristic of that program would change. And now I'm much more inclined to just let it run. So say we were doing again in that situation, we had 11 sets of pulling exercises. And again, this isn't prescriptive. I'm just making things up that I can
Mhm.
hold in my head. Um, I would probably keep that the same for a while, easily 6, 8 weeks. Just keep pushing on it. And again, because the gains you get in the beginning are a little bit deceptive. Even with an experienced lifter, if you haven't been doing those exercises in a while, you're going to get some gains that are just learning how to do the exercise better. But the gains that come from muscle hypertrophy, real architectural changes within the muscle, those take longer. And we know this. This is well documented in literature where you see, over 12 weeks, fairly, especially in trained lifters, people who have some experience, very small changes in the actual architecture of the muscle over 12 weeks. And if you've been training for years, it's very hard to see the difference in 3 months. Um, to the extent that sometimes it's hard to know if you're even making progress.
So what would your
All right,
preference
so I
then
think
be for changing changing any kind of training? So let's say you have somebody who's training the bench press or squatting for 4 or 5 weeks. Is your preference always to change the parameters of the exercise, like volume or something first, um, prior to changing the exercise? Like if they're not making
yeah, I
improvements, do
mean
you know
it
what I mean?
depends. I do, yeah, and I mean
Hmm.
it's a big question in a way, right? Because it's going to depend on the lifter or the trainee. Is if we're talking about an experienced lifter, then we would, look back through their training history, and that would inform the approach quite a bit.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so I think, let's take a squat, for example. We might look at what they've been doing and identify that, they're squatting a lot already. And what okay, I have to make up some things. So let's say they're trying to increase their 1 repetition maximum in their squat, right? So that's the assumption we're operating under. And we're going to say that this is someone who's been training, a few years, a while. So they've got their basic squat technique down. I'm going to assume that there aren't easy fixes, easy technical fixes where it's like, okay, change this and right away there's some improvement. They know what they're doing. They've been training a while. They're not making progress. In that case, again, in this invented person, the tendency would be for me to sort of back away from, the number of times that they're doing heavy singles and look to increase hypertrophy, like to work on building the muscles that are ultimately going to contribute
Yeah.
to a bigger maximum squat. And again, I think this is well supported in, the literature now. People still argue about it quite a bit. Think, I don't think they have a leg to stand on, honestly, at this point. And I think it bears out in practice as well. So, in this case, if we're looking at someone and say, okay, we need to build up the muscles, like try to do some amount of hypertrophy work for, the quads and the hip extensors, the things that are going to contribute to that squat, not completely getting away from squatting, but leaning a little more on other things that might help with hypertrophy, whether it's, belt squats or leg presses or, Romanian
Split
deadlifts,
squats.
things for the
Yeah.
hip extensors, split squats, sure, whatever. So, but something that, we would turn up the volume is probably
Hmm.
the first place I would look to, again, as part of a long-term plan. And again, what's our timeline? That's another big thing.
Yeah.
If this is somebody, who's looking at, I want to do 5% more in my squat in 6 months or 10% or whatever the number is, um, you would start there and plan backwards from that. So yeah, I would lean on volume initially to try to get some more muscle on them so they have something to work with. And then subsequently they can learn to use that muscle in a way that lets them express, a higher 1 repetition max squat.
As opposed to the muscle confusion, which I think got popularized actually through, if we want to go back to being a history podcast, the P90X program, which was that DVD program you
Oh,
got. And the big thing was I remember the advertisement saying it was about muscle confusion. about confusing your muscles. So your poor confused muscles are they don't know what to do, and then they just get jacked, basically, was the science behind it.
It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Let's get bigger.
Let's just get jacked.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
P90, it sounds so serious.
I know. It sounds
X.
sciencey almost, but the X makes it extreme.
It does, or maybe like,
yeah.
Or maybe like a lubricant. I don't know.
Or something for a car.
Yeah, it's like, oh man, I can't get this bolt off. Well, pass the P90X.
Oh, you're gonna get so jacked and just rip it off with your hands.
That's actually how it works. You spray the P90X on your hand, and you can then remove the stuck bolt.
Yeah, it's just a secret conglomerate of mechanics who've made this muscle confusion program. They just want people to not use tools anymore. Now we're turning into a conspiracy podcast.
Tools. Big tools.
Yeah. Speaking of tools,
you more P90X. Or try to big tools don't want you to know about P90X. All right, we've uncovered it.
Yeah,
we're gonna get canceled now.
I'm gonna have so many. I'm gonna have a whiteboard behind me with like yarn, like red yarn everywhere in the next podcast.
I like a crazy person wall, I believe is what they're calling them in the shows now. Yeah, you're a big tool, all right. Okay, so my second last one, or the second last thing is, and this, some people might cry foul and say this sort of runs against the narrative we've been building. And that's that sometimes you change things because you don't know. Both because you don't know what to do and because you don't know why some things work. And I'm gonna go with a really specific example on this because I like it, because it's kind of weird. But it's interesting too. So there was I'll post it in the show notes. I can't remember the name of the author, but it was part of a PhD thesis. And it was a biomechanics PhD, and they, cranked out a couple of papers, and that was the format for the thesis. So a publication-based thesis. And so what they showed with their model, or what he showed with his model, was that, so the muscles of the calf, so the gastrocnemius and the soleus, or the triceps rhea, depending on what you want to call it, contribute to extending the knee, so straightening the knee, in squatting pattern movements. So for those who don't know, when you think functional anatomy of the calf, which is what I'm just going to call those muscles now, it's to, push you up onto your tippy toes or do a pointer flexion. The gastrocnemius, which is part of that muscle, can also flex the knee, so bend the knee because it crosses the knee, right? So that's easy to understand. So what they found is less easy to understand, and that's that when your foot is planted on the ground through an effect called induced acceleration, it can actually straighten the knee or extend the knee. And so to really picture it, it helps to have a diagram. But think of if your foot's planted on the ground because you have, a heavy squat or a heavy weight on your shoulders, when you go to extend the knee and the calf flexes, it can't push your heel off the ground. So it ends up pulling the tibia and the fibia backward. Draw it out.
Does that,
or maybe we'll do an episode on it, on induced acceleration.
But does that change with weightlifting shoes? Just the angle of how your foot is on the ground?
That would reduce the amount of pointer flexion. I mean, they didn't go into that. I assume it would have an effect on the torque just because, you're changing the angle of the ankle. But the moral of the story was, stronger calves might help you stand up in a squat, particularly at higher knee angles, so towards the top of the squat. So when you think of, before you mentioned triple extension or a rapid explosive movement like jumping or, tackling or the final part of a weightlifting pull, there's a long history of people training their calves with the thinking being that this would help you, get that last inch of height by pushing your heel off the ground. But what it might actually be doing is helping you extend your knee just before that.
Interesting.
So, roundabout way of saying, sometimes you just don't know, right? And so, I know it's sort of a goofy cop out, but we don't. And sometimes you just look at a muscle and be like, that might contribute. Maybe I should put a little bit of work into it. And I don't think anyone's proposing, spending tons of time working your calves to improve your squat, but it shows that a little bit of calf work might help your squat. And there's probably others. Well, I know that there's others examples of this, and maybe we'll do an episode on it because it's pretty interesting. But to really get into it, we would probably want to do some diet or some figures or something, some visual aids, because describing it in an audio format is second best.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the because you don't know argument for changing your
So
exercises.
that's probably why my squat never went up, because my weak calves.
Yeah, probably
Makes sense.
for sure. That's
the
definitely
only
the thing.
reason. Yeah.
And I think the last reason, and you brought this up before, and I think this is a really good one, is sometimes you just need to change things up because it's fun
Mhm.
and it's interesting. And doing the same thing every day gets boring.
Yeah. And getting people engaged and doing is just going to guarantee that they're going to train longer and be more interested in it, which means they'll get stronger anyways.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not motivated, you're not going to make great progress typically. And and so sometimes just changing shit to mix it up is fun, and that's reason enough.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that's enough for this format, for just talking about some of the reasons you want to, introduce variety into your exercises or into your program, or to change exercises. So, the first was technical reasons, like to focus in on something and really drill down on maybe a more technical component of your workout, or in your sports training, the execution of some technique. And this often involves, breaking it down into smaller parts that can be more easily managed, where you're not thinking about 4 or 5 things in your technique, but you're just focusing on one thing because you've made it simple, you made it bite size. I think there's a lot of value in that. We talked about what I guess is really the flip side of that, where you're doing different things because, developing this sort of diverse set of motor skills seems to help people with learning. I'll be honest, I'm a bit less convinced about that one. And in my own coaching practice, I've found sort of mixed results on it. And I don't like the explanation that's often offered by motor theory. I don't think it's super robust yet. So, take that with a bit of a grain of salt. Focusing on a weakness. That's a big one, right? Like, you've got weak biceps, work on your biceps. It's so obvious, but people do get into, we all do what we like, right?
Yep.
Like,
I mean, of course,
I think we're all
we're all hedonists.
Yeah. So yeah. And I mean, I think that's where a coach comes in. I mean, certainly I think back to when I was weightlifting, I didn't really have a coach a lot of the time. And again, we're going back 20 years, and I focused on the things I liked, and I got good at those things. And I had what in retrospect are, some pretty glaring gaps in my development that a good coach could have said, "Hey, Alex, do this other thing that you're always avoiding." But, hindsight's 2020. All right. So
access to coaching.
what to watch out for. Yeah. Coaching. That's a tough one. Or it can be anyway. Although just contact us and we'll coach you. All right. So what to watch out for? Yeah. So where can this go wrong? And I think what you always have to ask yourself is, why are you doing this? Right? Like, what's the goal? Because everything sort of flows from that. Is the goal, hypertrophy? You just want to build bigger muscles because muscles are cool. Or maybe you're a bodybuilder. And, as a bodybuilder, you have some weird particular demands, like your serratus isn't big enough. And, your back doesn't look full. Well, you better focus on it, right? Even if it, doesn't have any obvious performance justification. Bodybuilding thought about performance. You got to have hypertrophy.
Aesthetics. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if that's the goal, then focus on that, right? And you start from there and you work backwards. I don't know. You have any thoughts on that? Anything else to add?
No, I think, I mean, this ultimately, like you said, comes back to, why are you doing this? And I think the tendency is for a lot of people to sort of draw back on, well, other people are doing this, or it was in the program that I got off of Joe Weider's latest issue of Super Jacked Mag or something like that. So it does really matter why.
Or what was the one you named? What was that?
Su- Super Jack Mag.
WXY
Maybe
3.
that's not the best name for a magazine in
No,
hindsight.
no, the C3PO. Your C3PO
Oh,
DD.
P90X.
Yeah, there we go. Your
Yeah,
P90X.
yeah, yeah.
Or now your chat
P90
GPT
Extreme.
workout, right? You just
Right,
extreme.
right. You,
Yes, extreme, of
it's
course.
it really does. It goes back to coaching, or to getting at least to asking yourself why. Why are you doing this? And if it's for one of the reasons that we're talking about, whether it's fun, I think that's a perfectly good reason. The motor thing is more, I think, of a coaching decision, whether that's a real thing or not. But just changing for the sake of changing, I think isn't necessarily good enough. You need to come up with a reason why. And again, a perfectly good reason is I'm just sort of sick of lying down and pushing a bar off my chest and then tearing a pec, as the case
Yeah.
was with me. And I've given up on that.
And I think actually you and I, so I'm going to age us a little bit, but something that I often find gets I guess, doesn't get enough coverage or appreciated is, I've been lifting weights for 30 years, maybe. And,
Hmm.
even I sometimes, like, it's hard to get motivated. Like, I don't always want to, go get it. And that doesn't get enough attention, like I'm coming up on 50. I don't always want to go in and smash the weights. And sometimes doing something different because it's fun
Yeah,
is reason enough. Like a few years ago, I bought some sandbags. Um,
I remember
I don't
this.
think there's anything
Yeah.
special about sandbags, but they were fun. And I just
Yep.
picked them up and throw them around and, toss over my shoulder or whatever, put it on top of something. And that was reason enough.
Yeah. I went through the same thing. The recently too with uh I bought a ladder for footwork. I haven't needed one of those since I played football. But I did it because I wanted some variety and a good way to work
It was
calves, which,
fun.
as I've learned now, is a great way to help me with squatting. But yeah, it was fun because I didn't want to just do skipping in the garage or something. And I find I personally work out between 5:30 and like 6:30 in the mornings, and it's really hard to get motivated at that time. No caffeine in the world helps me, and so I find that changing up exercises kind of gets me excited. It's just like I'm going to try something new. I'm going to try a different weight, different angle, even simple things like that. But that still does get me motivated.
Yeah. Well, yeah, 6 in the morning's a slog, man.
It
Um,
sucks.
yeah.
It's the only time though.
Right. So to wrap that piece up, what's the goal? Is it technical development? Then that should inform, the change you make. Are you looking at, speed power development? Okay. That should inform the change you make, right? Always go back to, why am I doing this? Is it just to keep you motivated so you don't get out of shape? All right. You buy sandbags, right? But you get a ladder.
Yep.
It doesn't even matter. You do something that keeps you motivated. All right. So another thing to watch out for, um, is then that's that changing your program or changing an exercise can give a false impression of progress.
Hmm.
So, and I'll post something in the show notes about, the timeline of adaptations to training, especially strength training. So, for those in the audience who don't know, the early parts of training, people will often say, these are neurological changes. And I don't want to get into what that means, but basically you learn to do the exercise better. There's not a ton of change in the actual structure of the muscle. It does happen, but it takes a while to accumulate and really add up to anything. And so in the beginning, you improve just because you learn how to do the movement. Even
Yep.
simple movements, we see this. Like when you think of, the simplest thing, like a biceps curl, there's actual learning that happens. You get better at doing it. And so that's not the kind of improvement that's going to carry over it into other things. It's not going to make you better at, your sport. It's not going to make you, it's not going to result in major muscle hypertrophy. And so you just need to watch out for it, recognize it's there, and know that in the first few weeks, the progress you're making is primarily just an artifact of learning what you're doing.
think they called that neurological adaptation or something. Was that what it was?
Yeah, so
Or yeah.
that's the name for it, right? So, and that's,
Hmm.
you get changes in like rate coding of motor neurons, and again, we will do an episode on that. But for this sort of end user episode, because I want this to be something people can take away usable information from, just know that the first little while you're learning to do the exercise. The changes in muscle size, the changes in muscle structure, that takes longer. You got to stick with an exercise for a while to really get out of it, to get the most out of it you can. How long exactly depends, but that's the thing to watch out for. Um, and so I think where that goes, if left unchecked, and again, I've done this, and I had people do this in the early 2000s, is you have programs that are constantly changing, right? Where you're every 4 weeks, the program changes. Maybe the client's happy, the athlete's happy because they feel like, oh, I'm always making progress. But when
Yeah.
you look at the big picture of, are they gaining muscle? Are they getting leaner? Are they getting faster? You're probably not getting the best bang for buck,
Hmm.
right? Like they'll improve. Like, I'm not saying if you change a program, you won't make any progress, but you could do better, right? All right. And the last thing, and this is actually trickier, and that this is where, the experience of the trainee or the coach, I think, really comes in. Um, we said before that you should inform the changes with your goals, right? So you start with your goal. You say, I want to, be faster. So you have to understand what the gap between your current performance, or what's causing that gap. So, for example, say you're a sprinter or an athlete that wants to improve their acceleration at the beginning of a sprint, like you're a soccer player. You're like, okay, when I'm in a sprint for a ball, if it's like under 15 meters away, the other player usually gets there before I do. And so you think, I need to be faster. So you think things like, I need fast feet. And there's lots of content around that, right? I need to do ladders. I need to work on my footwork. But one of the big things preventing your acceleration in a sprint isn't fast feet, it's strength, right?
Hmm.
So it's the ability to
Yeah.
accelerate your body from a standstill. And it's your acceleration in the sprint is very strength dependent. And so that can be tricky because, you've correctly identified the gap. You've said, okay, I don't accelerate well. I can't catch the ball or get the ball before the other player does. So I need to be faster. Correct. So I should work on
Yeah.
footwork so my feet are faster. Incorrect. Almost always incorrect. Maybe, if
Yeah.
you're new, it might be correct. Um, but usually for an experienced athlete, it's going to be a strength issue, not a footwork issue, right?
Being
Um,
stronger will never hurt. Like, I think that's the other important thing to think about is
no,
it will
that's a good
never
point,
hurt to be
actually.
stronger.
The penalty for a little extra strength is zero. I suppose there's an opportunity cost at some point where if you're, spending
Hmm.
time on one thing, you're not spending on another, but being a little too
Right.
strong, it's a good place to be.
No one's ever
Um,
accused you or me of being a little too strong.
I'll come back. You're a strong guy.
This makes me
Um,
sad.
what are you talking? Why are you so hard on yourself? All right. I'm gonna have to rate you like an affirmation after this. I'll send you a text.
I
You're okay,
just
buddy. You
keep
think you're great.
telling me I'm too strong and we'll be okay. That's all I ask for. Maybe you're too strong.
Fair
Have you
enough.
thought about like laying off weights for a bit and letting everybody else catch up? That'd be nice. Just be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that has to do with my haircut, but um,
Shut up.
and so this touches on one final thing, and that's that sometimes technical errors are actually strength deficits. Okay, so you've
Hmm.
identified a technical error in our model for how to decide whether you want to change your exercise selection in order to identify or to deal with, sorry, a technical error. So I'm going to go to weightlifting because that's my first love. Let's say you've got a weight on, you've got it wrapped in the front. You're going to do a jerk, right? So you're going to throw the weight overhead. and you've identified the technical error as you slump forward in the dip. Very common.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that you don't understand, what you're supposed to do. It's often that you're not strong enough to do it. Right. So
Right.
the technique is limited by the strength. Right.
Yeah, because if you go lighter, you don't dip, right?
Yeah. And that's one
Yeah.
of the ways to identify this. And I'll bet you could think of, examples from hammer throw, right? Where,
Yeah.
you take a lighter implement or you're throwing a little slower and you can execute it fine, but at
Mm-hmm.
full speed or with a full weight implement, you can't do it. And often this isn't technique per se, or your lack of understanding of the technique isn't a barrier. It's your ability to execute it under load.
Hammer is fast. Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's like it's pulling you forward. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's a thing in hammer throw.
That is a thing, yeah. Where you have
Yeah.
to, whereas
Good
with the
guess.
lighter hammer, I find sometimes with the lighter hammer too, you get the opposite where you can't apply force in the same way. And you have to think about it differently because it's not you leaning back, you're actually falling backwards more
Yeah.
because it's a lighter
It's
implement.
not a sufficient counterweight.
Yeah.
Unless you can go faster. Right.
Exactly.
It's a little intro mechanics physics for our listeners. Action force and opposite reaction forces and all that. Equal and opposite
No better
reaction
sport.
force.
Yeah, no better sport for biomechanics nerds than hammer throw, I say. I think
it's pretty obvious when it goes wrong. If anyone ever watches hammer throw fails, you can see what Alex is talking about when it goes catastrophically wrong. But yeah, so again, with the example of the jerk, they don't necessarily need more jerk technique work. They need to strengthen their upper back, for instance. All right, so what do we do with all of this, right? I think we can just sort of wrap it up by, summarizing what we've covered or giving a framework, I guess, for what people can use or how they can approach deciding when they need to either change the program or change an exercise. So first, always know your goal, right? Like
that's so important. Yeah.
I mean, even like you said, even if the goal is just to stay in shape and not have a stroke, that's a goal, right? Like I want good health. Okay, well, what should you do? And that will inform what you do. Endlessly chasing 1 rep maximums in the bench press, probably not the best way to do that.
No.
Some blend
Definitely
of
not.
strength work and aerobic work, that's a better bet, right?
Yep.
So yeah, whether it's just general health, whether maybe rehabilitation, maybe it's to get back to some lost level of performance or to work around some injury that maybe won't ever be back how, you'll never be whole, I guess. Hypertrophy, whatever it is, know your goal.
Yeah.
Consider your timeline, right? Because this is going to inform your approach. Do you have 8 weeks until a competition? Or do you have 8 years to develop an athlete from, 14-year-old to top level? Or do you have, 40
Forever.
years to, stay healthy and
Stay
try to
fit.
not die and live a long health span?
Yep.
Consider your training history. Okay. So you have to either you or a coach look at your training history to try to identify the gaps that are standing between your current performance or your current level of whatever it is, health, and the end goal, right? So, is the thing holding you back on your bench press hypertrophy related? Is it technique related? Is it just that you haven't been training that long? So, identifying that, looking back at your training, saying, okay, well, you never spend time on, this thing. Your pecs are weak and you get stuck in the bottom of the bench press. We need to work on your pecs, right? This is an easy one.
Yeah. It's a fun one too.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, coaches I find are really good with that. The competent coach, because it's really hard to evaluate your own training. Just like evaluating lots of things about yourself, it's people say they're their own worst critics, but they also have the biggest blind spots.
Yep.
I do anyway.
Me too.
All right. Yeah. So I did. Do you have any injuries you need to work around? That's another training.
That's a big one.
Thing.
That's a big one for me, especially as I've been an aging athlete. Yeah. aging athletes, I think I find that variety for me serves a purpose there, specifically with just old nagging shoulder and knee injuries. Every so often I'll have to back off of squatting, but I want to keep squatting movement. So I'll move to Bulgarian split squats, which I find actually I benefit quite a bit from. Um, shoulder exercises, changing up the angle on the kind of pressing I'm doing, moving to dumbbells, which I've done since that hilarious pec blow up I had with the barbell bench, where I sort of questioned my life as to why am I still doing barbell bench press? I don't really need to do this.
I think that's a good point too. And you don't need to do anything unless it's something that's the event.
Mhm.
Like if you're a weightlifter, you need to do the snatch. If you're anyone else, you don't need to do the snatch. There is some alternative movement, right? If you're a power lifter, you need to bench press.
Yeah.
Everyone else can find something else to do.
Yeah.
So if you've got an injury or something that just doesn't work for you, you don't have to do it. I can't do supinated grip pull-ups. They just hurt my elbows, always have. I don't know. I just don't do them. It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
And most exercises are like that. There's always some alternative exercise. And I think that's a good argument for, improving your repertoire of exercises that you just know and are familiar with. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, cool. So yeah, I think we can wrap it up. So everybody, don't forget to tune in next week. Do all the things people ask you to do at the end of a podcast. Like it, subscribe, leave 5 stars. Apparently it helps the algorithm. Even if you hated it, even if you hated it and you got this far,
5 stars of hate. Think of it that way.
yeah, 5 stars of hate. I would definitely not recommend. 5-star, not recommend. We'll have a bunch of supporting material in the show notes. You can also check out our YouTube channel. That's at Praxis Strength and Nutrition. Check out our website, praxispn.com. That's also they'll all be in the show notes. Talk to you next week.
Talk to you next week.